Good morning. Thank you very much for being here for the third of 6 webinars in our series. This webinar is on social media and mental health from the schoolroom to the armed forces. It is one of the 6 seminars for the NATO CML series that focuses on resilience through media literacy. I am Michelle Johnson. I am an affiliate and associate for the Center for Media Literacy, and I want to welcome our 3 very distinguished guests who you'll be hearing from today. The first is Rebecca Goolsby. Dr. Goolsby is a cyber anthropologist, researcher, and innovation research leader who works with NATO in the Science and Technology Organization on problems of cyber international diplomacy and strategic communications. We also have Dr. Michael Rich, who is an associate professor of pediatrics at Harvard Medical School and director of the Digital Wellness Lab. His aim is to use interdisciplinary science to promote healthy child development by guiding their mindful use of media. After our panelists speak, we're going to have some Q&A and some discussion between the panelists. And then to synthesize and respond with some remarks is Dr. David Fogelson. Dr. Fogelson is a clinical professor of psychiatry at the David Geffen School of Medicine at UCLA. He specializes in the diagnosis and treatment of psychosis, mood disorders, and anxiety disorders. And he is also an expert psychopharmacologist and psychotherapist. So welcome. Some housekeeping things. I want to ask all of our participants while our speakers are speaking to please mute themselves so we reduce extraneous noise. And if you have questions for our panelists, please put them in the chat. We don't have much time, and so I don't know that we'll get to everything, but we will do our best. So with that, I'd like to turn this over to Dr. Rebecca Goolsby.
Good morning. We're going to have people trickling in, I think, throughout this situation. Let me pull up my slides. Hello, slides. The host has disabled participant sharing. Please make me a co-host.
Tessa can do that, hopefully.
We can't hear you, Tessa.
I'm looking for that ability. I saw it earlier.
Okay, click on the participants list down at the bottom, and then click on my name.
Okay.
And
more. Okay, I see. Make co-host. All right. Thank you for the guidance. I appreciate that.
No trouble. I have done literally hundreds of these things, and I'm also the specialist at my church. Let me find the PowerPoint share, and let me put it into presentation mode. Right. All right. So good morning. They asked me to talk about mental health, and I'm an anthropologist. I studied people at the group level, but I've also studied people, at the nation state level. My fieldwork was in Thailand. I was a Fulbright scholar, and in 2000, I moved to Washington D.C. to take a position as a program officer on how information was changing relationships, social relationships, the command and control relationships within the military. Since then, we have progressed to creating a program of research, first on social hysteria propagation and rumor, which was always a problem in humanitarian work. Then we moved on, of course, to the problem of propaganda, especially in terms of the Russian invasion of Crimea. That's been kind of a lot of this work kind of took off. We did a great deal of technical work on this aspect of it, and so it's a fairly robust program on the problems. But rather than being a computer science perspective, we took a social science perspective on this work. Um, and this kind of social science perspective of social psychology, the problems of cults and what Amanda Muntell calls cultic social formations, and the special affordances of social media to create the kinds of environments that that make people susceptible to becoming enveloped in a cultish social formation and dragged into their particular and special world view. Now, around the same time that I was running around talking about this problem space, which was, 2014, 2015, and then into 2016, other people in the military came up with this notion of cognitive warfare. And this cognitive warfare made every cognitive scientist I ever met kind of upset because they didn't seem to understand the difference between social psychology and cognitive science. There's a special field in my field called cognitive anthropology, and people try to approach it from that approach, but that approach is slightly off as well. But since I am an anthropologist, and one of my specialties in anthropology is folktale and storytelling, I always start off with a good, compelling story to help people orient to what the science that I'm about to get into. And so that's when I present the cannibal cocktail party. Okay. Now, suppose this is a fairy tale to help you orient to the social science I'm about to lay down. Okay. So let's suppose that you are at an enormous hotel, or perhaps some streets in Zaragoza, Spain, where there are nightclubs and cocktail parties going on all along the lane. Okay. And the goal then is to go from cocktail party to cocktail party and have a good time. Now, there's this one shady club, this one shady cocktail party center that everybody tells you is dangerous and where, bad things happen. But, you and your friends are young and edgy. And yeah, and some of your friends are like, yeah, I've been there. It's a lot of fun. And so in you go to the cocktail party and everybody loves you. They clink glasses with you. They buy you drinks. They put an arm around you. And you've never had such a good time with these people. And so you start drinking these cocktails. And they're pretty tasty and they're pretty good and you're feeling a lot better. Some of your friends are beginning to look at you and look at the cocktails and they're going, no, man, no, dude, we can't do this. This is not good. And they beg you to leave the party, but you're having a good time and you know what you're doing and you're a grown person. So you keep on staying at the cocktail party. And so your friends, you kind of lose track of them. You kind of like go deeper and deeper and deeper into the parties, and then nasty stuff happens. Okay, and you join the crowd at first in yelling hoots and chants, and then somebody is outed as being someone against the cannibal club, and they get hit on, and maybe you'll stand in the back and just watch, okay, while other people are getting hit. But but after a while, you're going to get fairly drunk and you find yourself starting to engage in the violence as well. And before you know it, you are so deep into the club and you're tired and you're exhausted and you're angry and maybe you're afraid, but you cannot find the exit. And all of the friends that you had, they don't seem to be here or you can't seem to reach them. And before you know it, you're the person who's being eaten alive. Well, this is the story of the January 6th people and a lot of people in this world who first got into it thinking that they could find the door at any time, okay? That they themselves were smart enough and capable enough and they could leave at any time and that they knew their limits of what they were drinking and they understood everything, and yet there they are. Now, if you go out into the general press, you'll find people who get involved in what we call cultic social formations on the internet as stupid. Okay, that's usually the label that people give to them. But if you actually talk to people involved in cultic social formations in any color, in any cultural milieu, you know, from Sweden to Japan to all these other kinds of cultic social formations, you will find that they're very intelligent people and that they had a specific road that they went down in order to get to the place where they go, and that is very similar. Okay, um, you know, they get involved because their friends are involved, and they find themselves drawn more and more into the situation. And when their friends are going and doing other things, they're still finding this particular social formation that they have joined compelling. Okay, and ego gratifying and uplifting and happy. Okay, this goes for Westboro Baptist Church. This goes for all kinds of cultic social formations that you find out there. Is that initially there's this sense of newfound comrades and companionships. In social science, we have relationships called parasocial relationships. And in the parasocial, which has been studied all the way back since the 30s, when people would begin to think that they actually physically knew people on the silver screen, okay? And so they felt, because of the, you know, the movies and the talkies, especially, that they themselves had this deep relationship with Marilyn Monroe and other kinds of figures, okay? Social media provides us with a much closer contact with those parasocial figures that we have in our imaginations. Oh, I would definitely be friends with her or him, or you know, we think alike, just based upon what their public presentations on the screen or in social media. For example, Morgan Fairchild follows me. What the heck? And you're like, wow. And so I must have a lot in common with Morgan Fairchild. I have nothing in common with Morgan Fairchild, but the that sense of relationship, okay, that sense of connection, um, feels more real in the cyber social world, in these cannibal cocktail parties that we enter into, and yet we know nothing about those people really. We only have these kind of imaginary images of who they are. And so this is how people get drug in. They're love bombed at first. They become one of the crowd. They learn to vilify and hate and disregard the people that the crowd disregards and hates. And over time, they become more susceptible to other kinds of suggestions. Now, one of the things that people don't know a lot about, and as a term I often have to introduce to people, is stochastic terrorism. And in stochastic terrorism, a leader or influencer, or perhaps an influential group, okay, begins to present stories and arguments and information to inflame the crowd against an individual, okay, or perhaps a group, a social group, okay. And what happens in that kind of situation, in that toxic swill, is that people pay attention to their parasocial relationship with that thought leader, okay? And it could be somebody from just within their small social circle on the internet to very high people up in government and in culture, okay? And they begin, in order to improve that sense of closeness, you know, they amplify and approve of the concept of violence. And within that group, someone can break. Okay. So back in 2016, we had that fellow Edgar Welch who went to a pizza to Comet Pizza, and with an AR-15, and attempted to find the pedophile ring led by Hillary Clinton and John Podesta. Okay, and that whole thing was about you know, first it started off with a WikiLeaks email dispersion of John Podesta's emails, in which John Podesta mentions Comet Pizza as a place for, you know, an activity in Alexandria. And this story got blown up in social media until it became this enormous thing. The fellow went to court, and after he was arrested, no one was hurt, thankfully. And he said, and he never pled insanity. What he did say was that the intel was incorrect. The intel was wrong. The intelligence was wrong. And because he wasn't crazy and he could never, he was completely sane, but thoroughly influenced toward a stochastic terrorist act. And this is the problem that we're having in, let's say, let's not in the United States, but also what other places. Oops. Okay, I have to click the screen, actually.
Mine at 6 o'clock in the morning, you're asleep.
Um,
Sometimes. All right, back to work, Kathleen.
can I ask that if you're not, to please mute or
Mute.
put yourself on mute if you are not one of the speakers to eliminate the background noise. And also, we're having 10-minute speakers. These are 10-minute presentations, so I just want to make sure that we're staying on time.
Okay. So, so I'm going to go through a lot of the story. So innovation is a problem because it provides for new affordances. And as we all know with Twitter, the rules are a problem. Cognitive warfare as a concept is a problem because it suggests that everything is between your ears, okay? Not between your social relationships. And in social science, what we know is if you have a friend who hates Winnie the Pooh, you might not have a great opinion, or you might still like Winnie the Pooh. But if you have 2 or 3 friends who hate Winnie the Pooh, the chances of you hating Winnie the Pooh are huge. And so by substituting parasocial relationships for social relationships, we remove the filter that helps us to stay sane, that helps us to differentiate between good situations and bad situations, and good truth and non-truth. Cognitive dissonance occurs when an individual has a fixed belief and has taken concrete steps to put a sign on his car or other kinds of indicators. Some people quit their jobs. And when people do those sorts of things, it kind of cements them to the group, particularly if you alienate family members over it. Now, when this belief is disconfirmed by facts on the ground, all of the research that has been done, beginning with Leon Festinger's work on flying saucer cults in the 1950s and 60s, then we double down as people when we do this. It is a known phenomenon that people, when they are placed with ideas and information that completely contradicts everything that the belief is about, do not abandon the belief because they have already latched in their social identities, and nobody wants to walk the walk of shame. So this is when we come to the concept of social cybersecurity. Social cybersecurity is a new kind of subdiscipline in which we're trying to begin to talk about how we can develop new affordances, new capabilities, new social issues, new social capabilities such as media literacy, in order to help people to understand these sociological processes and incorporate fixes or mitigations in their own life, either through technical means or through social means. And what we're working here toward is a cyber social science. Okay, we need more studies in cyber anthropology. So how does fascist, violent recruitment happen in Sweden or Norway? Okay, and how does it happen in France or Italy? We need to understand these processes cross-culturally because we have good reason to believe that there are some differences. Cyber sociology, how these social formations function, cyber social psychology, what are the ways that people get kind of like tricked into coming and tricked into staying, and what cyber economics. We need to understand the monetary incentives for creating and promulgating these groups, which are significant. Now, before you get too worried about it all, okay, and people often come to me with very sad faces and going, "We can't do anything about it." Okay, yeah, we can. Margaret Mead said, "Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world." And indeed, it is the only thing that ever has. And that is kind of like where I want to leave you, that we can do these things. We can fight back. These are social processes that we can better understand. And there are simple fixes that media literacy will provide for us as audiences and communities and that's where we need to go. And I have some recommended reading here. Cialdini's work. He never really talks about about the cyber issue very much, but his influence techniques are a study of influence is pretty comprehensive and very approachable for non-scientists. Adriana Montiel's Cultish is very good up to explaining how social cults form online and offline. And of course, Leanne Festinger's classic work on flying saucer cults, which is as readable and fun to read today as it was, 1980s when I first came across it. And then, of course, the vanity inclusion. This is one of the things that I have written about social cyber effects that I wrote back in 2011, actually. So thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Goolsby. Yes, I want to make sure we are staying on schedule as much as possible here, but I want to give equal time to Dr. Michael Rich. Michael, please go move forward. And you have to unmute.
There we go. I will build on Dr. Goolsby's ruminations on parasocial relationships. I have often been known to say that we lost a lot when friend became a verb. And what we have done in social media is we have substituted quantity of contacts for quality of contacts. And I think that we should re-examine particularly social media, although I will apply it to all media because I also believe that all media are social in one way or another. I mean, when we are watching Dora the Explorer and responding to her questions, it is a social interaction. We're not interacting directly with each other. But then again, we're not really doing that on Facebook or Snapchat or Instagram either. And I think that if we can take a step back and really look at how we interact online and understand how that affects all of us. First of all, we do get into these parasocial relationships, not just with movie stars or political leaders or any kind of conspiracy theorists, but we enter into them with each other, unfortunately now. We are, what is happening is that we have, in part because of our physical separation, which was, of course, accelerated and amplified during the pandemic and the lockdown, but also in part because of our fear of intimacy. We have allowed these devices and these platforms that connect us to come between us, and not as an avenue so much as a filter or a wall. And some of that filter is the fact that it's asynchronous, that we are doing it, we are sending it and receiving it at different times and in different places. We are doing so in a situation that does not allow us to read and respond to each other's responses to it. So if a young person, and true confessions, I'm a pediatrician, I specialize in adolescents. So that's who I'm talking about, but that's really where the hotbed of use of social media is in adolescence. And perhaps those of us who are at least chronologically adults behave like adolescents in social media often, in the sense of criticizing and trolling each other, feeling that we are less vulnerable, less identifiable. But I think that one of the things that we could really look at social media writ broadly is that it doesn't have to be the way it is. It does not have to be a place of echo chambers, of going down rabbit holes, following those 3 people who don't like Winnie the Pooh. And we can take a step back and inject some of the cognitive dissonance that Dr. Goolsby was talking about, inject some of the what if and could you see it another way, But I actually, and one of the occupational hazards of being a pediatrician is optimism. And I hold firmly to the belief that we can actually use social media as an instrument of peace. Imagine, if you will, that a young person in the US and a young person in Iran are on social media with each other, back and forth, getting to know each other, telling each other about their lives, and their respective leaders say, take up arms against those people. They are the enemy. I would argue that adolescents, basically, who are seeking autonomy and often questioning authority, can push back and say, wait a minute, I know this kid in Iran better than I know you, my president, premier, prime minister, et cetera. I'm not doing that. And I really think that we can, if we are thoughtful and mindful and compassionate about this, that we can step back and start using social media in authentic ways. And what I mean by that is that we are now, for the most part, using social media the same way that the corporations do. We use social media to market ourselves to the world, to show how good looking we are, or, with the help of filters, of course, and Photoshop, but also to show the great vacations I go on, and my hot new boyfriend, and the new car that my dad got. We are not our true selves in that environment. And if we think about those relationships in our lives that are the most meaningful, the most sustaining, they're not based on how good looking, rich, fulfilled, or famous someone is. They're actually based on our limitations. And the fact that we have someone who cares about us despite our own limitations, and who also needs us to help them compensate for their limitations. And so if we can learn to be authentic and true about our true selves to each other, where we acknowledge that we are struggling, we acknowledge that we are confused, maybe even scared, but we are seeking empathy and compassion, and offering empathy and compassion, I think we will do a whole lot better. And I think that we need to take a step to really think about what we're calling digital wellness at the Digital Wellness Lab, obviously. And the way we define digital wellness is as an intentional state of physical, mental, and social health that occurs with mindful engagement in the digital and natural environment. And I'm using the word environment in the singular because for young people, there is no difference between the online and offline world. There is no seam between them. They move between them freely. And even the concept of screen time is actually an obsolete artifact of the days of television, when there were shows on at a certain time that lasted a certain period of time that we watched. We now don't use screens that way. I study screens and their effects on our physical, mental, and social health, and I couldn't possibly tell you how much screen time I had yesterday. And that is because we move in and out of these environments. We have screens in virtually every built environment we're in. We are, wearing them on our wrists. We have them in our pockets. And I think that we need to be aware that this is a single environment, and particularly for young people growing up in it. And it's an ecosystem that we can modify and share and move in the right directions. And I would argue that as we have developed near infinite connectivity, it has actually undermined our connectedness with each other in deep and meaningful ways. And if we can help our children and ourselves meet a new set of expectations for how we use these power tools, what we use them for, and an awareness of what we are not doing, what we are giving up by using them and how we use them, I think we will come to a better place in our world. So I'm arguing for always upgrading by one. When we're thinking of tweeting text, when we're thinking of texting, call, better yet, video call, but best of all, get together in person, face to face, so that when you say something as a loving tease and they interpret it as hurtful, you read it on their face, you read it in their body, and you respond to it at that moment. That does not happen in social media. That does not happen online. And so I think that it's really, really important for us to understand that ultimately we're in this all together. It is us. As Pogo said, we have met the enemy and he is us. And it is what we do with this incredible global connectivity and how we can meld the African proverb with Marshall McLuhan and say, it takes a global village to raise a child. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Rich. There's so much in what you said. Right now, I want to, excuse me, I want to see if anybody has any questions that includes our three panelists, or anything that they'd like to discuss. And for our other participants, if there's anything you'd like to ask of our panelists.
I have a question. I came from both Dr. Goolsby and Dr. Rich's presentations really with a sense of optimism that we can have some effect, and that these environments can be shaped. They definitely are something that it's up to all of us to really contribute to and help form. So with that in mind, how would you see framing some of these issues? I know, Dr. Rich, you've talked before about the idea of, let's not frame it from a negative standpoint, because if we're looking at all of the scary things that can happen on the internet, well then we're really giving the focus and attention to that. So how would you see framing the use of the internet and media literacy's role in being able to help shape that?
Are you asking me or Dr. Goolsby?
Well, I'm happy to ask you, and if Dr. Goolsby has some comments, I'd love to hear.
Okay, well, beyond the fact that we shouldn't go at it all negative, I think that approaching this as something to fear, as entering the internet and learning about internet safety, it presumes the internet is unsafe. It means that we enter this space back on our heels in a defensive stance, ready for badness to happen. And I would argue that no good decision is made out of fear. Fear is a very primal, reflexive response, and we're not being thoughtful about it. And we're not leaning into this in the sense of saying, this is our environment. This is something I can master. And so I see media literacy, digital citizenship, all of those things as really building on our knowledge and our competence, for existing in this world, in this digital world, as an authentic person with ideas, with creativity, and with vulnerabilities. I think that our best conversations with others often happen around our vulnerabilities, around the ways that we are feeling lost, feeling confused, feeling hurt in many ways. So I think that what literacy to this world does is it gives us the tools to be resilient, the tools to be responsive in proactive ways. And actually, one of the things that I really emphasize is we need to bring back boredom. We need to bring back boredom because we can't get on an elevator without pulling out our smartphone and checking whatever drivel is happening. We can't get on a bus. I walked out of the hospital a few weeks back after a really hard clinical day with a lot of difficult patients and situations, and turned left and to the west, and there was a brilliant sunset. Everyone on the street was staring at their phone. We miss the world. We miss each other. We don't look up and smile at strangers anymore. That's creepy, right? And what happened here? But also, I think that we have to bring back boredom, because not only does it give the empty space for us to be thinking the new, to be creative, to be imaginative, but it's a little uncomfortable. So it motivates us to fill that space with new ideas. And we have to remember that about a century and a quarter ago, there was a very bored patent officer in Switzerland who wrote the 3 most seminal papers of theoretical physics in the space of 1 year. Because, as he said later in his life, because he was bored and his mind could travel.
Thank you. And
And-
Dr. Goolsby, I'm sorry.
Maybe-
Dr. Fogelson, let him.
Yeah, Michelle, maybe I can jump in here, and I'll try to bring this into my world of sitting in a consultation room with a patient who is frightened, hurting, afraid, and maybe has been given misdirection about how to solve the problem that they're presenting to me. It could be that they're in a psychosis. It could be they're in a deep suicidal depression. And I want to take off on things that both Rebecca and Michael have touched upon. And I'd like to say, I think in a very overarching sense, what we want to do is create a health-enhancing cocktail party, as opposed to a cannibal cocktail party. And in this health-enhancing cocktail party, rather than going in and the goal being to down as many drinks as you can so you can become part of the reverie that the crowd is engaged in, you want to have one drink, which we psychiatrists think is often very helpful for lubricating social interaction and decreasing social anxiety. And in that kind of cocktail room, I think the question becomes, how do you then get people on board to learn how to critically evaluate a problem? How do you teach an evidence-based approach to solving a problem? And I actually face this when I sit in my consultation room with individual patients. And this will take me 2 or 3 minutes just to briefly tell this story of how I work with patients, which will lead to questions for Roxanne. I think you're not on mute.
Thank you.
Thank you. So I often have to ask myself the question, how do I change a fixed belief when I'm trying to persuade a patient to accept a life-saving therapy? And I'm confronted often with a patient who's been in the cocktail cannibal room. Psychotherapy cannot possibly help me. Psychotherapy is only common sense. Engaging in psychotherapy is going to be a waste of money for me. I will not take medication. That's bullshit promulgated, pardon my French, by the capitalist pharmaceutical companies. They just want to drug me. They don't really want to help me with my bipolar disorder. So what do I do when I'm confronted with patients like that, who often are, to some degree, dragged kicking and screaming out of the cannibal cocktail room and into my cocktail room? Well, the first step is just getting into the room. And I think it really, and Michael touched on this, it really helps to be a real brick and mortar room. There's an attachment and an ability to develop a sense of trust with someone when you're in a real room with them. And if they go into the room with your having been advertised as having some legitimate expertise, and that to some degree they do trust you, that's why they're in the room with you. So I think a question I would have for the two panelists is, how do you develop trust and esteem for leaders of the healthy cocktail room, not the cannibal cocktail room? How do we do that? And I know that, and I think cognitive dissonance is the right expression. I'm faced with that, and I have to try to figure out a way to help someone understand there's a different way of looking at the problem that they're facing, and that I'm not being malicious or evil in my reasons for wanting to persuade them to look at this in a different way. And I actually use cyber tools, if I guess I can call them that, to try to educate my patients. I'll say, here are 3 medicines that I think are going to help you not commit suicide. You know, you have a 15% risk of death by suicide. That's a high mortality rate, higher than most other illnesses. We need to get you on the right treatment. We don't want that as an outcome. Here's a source that you can look at online to read about 3 medicines I recommend. If you don't want to take the prescription today, that's fine. Let's read about it, then let's have a conversation about it. Let's try to figure out which of those medicines might be acceptable to you and might be helpful. Or here are different psychotherapies and why they might work. I even use an approach developed at the Anna Freud Institute in London called mentalization-based psychotherapy, which is trying to understand why somebody is thinking the way they do. So rather than call somebody stupid, like the journalists do, and say, oh my God, you know, that's a totally insane idea. Here's the evidence for why you're wrong. You go, oh my gosh, that must be really hard to believe that this is how the world works and that the world is against you in this way and it's trying to disenfranchise you and take things away from you. Tell me about that belief. How did you get to that belief? Help me understand how you think about that. That engages the individual. It helps them feel that their belief is being validated. They're not just being rejected as stupid. And then it allows you to begin to have a dialogue. But I guess my question for the panelists is, I'm one person working with one troubled individual. On a larger social scale, how do you engage people in this same kind of conversation to try to seek truth rather than just believe, you know, attached to a cultish belief?
Well, thank you for bringing that to such an individual level. I think that's super important because that's where the work has to take place. Rebecca or Michael, do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, I struggle with the cultish formation within my own family, as most of us do, okay, who have a diverse family, and trying to get people away from the cult. The book that has helped me the most is Talking to Crazy by Mark Goulston, who is a psychiatrist.
He's my best friend.
I require all of my researchers to read this book. It is a requirement, okay? And it has to do with the notion that, as a psychiatrist, you need to put them in a safe space and you need to work within the belief system, that sort of thing.
Exactly.
Well, one of and I've had some progress with that approach, okay? Not attacking the direct, attachment to the cult figure, so that the fight between us about reality isn't about me and their cult figure of choice, okay? They don't have to choose between me and their cult figure of choice. I work around the elements, and I try to make sure that I'm always respectful and caring. And the most important thing is, of course, to keep connection. But that's the thing, is that you need to teach the people around them this, okay? Because it is because as important, and I mean critically important, as the psychiatric and psychological work is, okay, it needs to be re-mirrored in the social circle around them, and you need to rebuild this. Mia Bloom and other researchers under my direction have worked with white supremacists and try to get people out of white supremacist kind of cults and that sort of thing. And they talk about the fact that these young people were started in damaged, okay? And so then the cult itself damages them further, all right? So you really need to have some other kind of connection. One of the reasons that I'm not, okay, so the reason that I see the most people, and even myself, reach for my phone in the elevator has to do with anxiety. And social media can be a calming thing. It can make you feel better. And one of the things, the initial cult formation is people get made to feel better for a while before they're plunged into crazy. All right. And so in order to escape, and people are trying desperately to get back that sense of comfort and self-affirmation that they got from the start by drinking more and more. Okay. And this is one of the problems that we see. One of the most interesting things that I have seen is been the growth of Mastodon, which is one of my current studies. And Mastodon is to Twitter as methadone is to heroin. Okay, and that it is far less toxic because the crowd decides what's toxic and cuts off people who are. Okay, there are some problems with this because angry Black Twitter has come to Mastodon and tried to say their truths, and people have reacted very negatively, and it's been problematic. Okay, so I'm not saying the Mastodon is perfect or even all that good, but it's better than Twitter. Like I said, that's why I call it Mastodon. Mastodon is methadone. It ain't great, but it's better. Okay, and and I think that just watching and listening to the people talk about their Mastodon experience, when they talk about feeling more rested and less exhausted, because the actual algorithms of Twitter and Instagram and TikTok are designed to inflame and designed to create a sense of urgency, of continual reinfection and engagement. Okay. And one of the things that this has shown me, which is the difference between Mastodon and these, is that there are a number of the algorithms that are making people sicker. Okay. And people need to have this explained to them, okay, for one thing, and that can help a little bit, especially if they trust you. And then, my own therapist, when I was in the depths of 2016 was a very bad year for me, told me to go and take walks in green spaces and take what she called green baths. So it's not just boredom. You need to go seek inspiration and some quiet alone time without with just drinking that stuff in for a while on the regular. And physical stuff, I go to the gym. My body doesn't show it, but I do go. And to make sure that because in taking people out of the cults, you really need to study some of the work on cults, because this really is where we're at. Okay, then you could find the techniques that people use to detoxify them. The other notion is that when somebody comes out of a serious cult, they cannot just jump back into society that will reject them immediately. Okay, they have to have a kind of holding space. Okay, group therapy, man. We need group therapy for Nazis. We need cognitive behavioral therapy for Nazis. We really do need that. And that is a developing field for psychiatry. And with that, I'll end. Over.
I'm going to agree with most of and disagree with some of what you just said, Rebecca. I think people go to social media seeking relief of their anxiety, but our research and our clinical experience time and time again has shown that almost all of the time, they come back feeling more anxious rather than less anxious, because they go seeking connections with people who seem to be happier, more successful, more fulfilled than they are. And so I think that that's a real issue. And to answer David's question about how do we do that, I think we should take a step back from fixing their crazy or fixing their faults or arguing with them. And I think a hugely powerful tool for that is humor. Having a sense of humor, particularly self-deprecating humor, to have us all, I mean, when we laugh, we are vulnerable. When we laugh, we are open. And there's something else about humor. You are giving a gift of joy to someone, you know, without strings attached, without anything. When you give that gift of joy, you are also modeling that giving of joy to that person. And you are, and I think that one of the things that we learned, frankly, the hard way in adolescent medicine with teenagers is a risk-averse approach to teen pregnancy, to STIs, to drug use, to all of the various things that high schoolers and adolescents of all kinds get into trouble. I actually define adolescent medicine as healthcare for people healthy from the neck down, because this is about as good as it ever gets. It's the acne, sex, drugs, and rock and roll that get them into trouble. But that when you take a strengths-based approach and you build on their strengths, that allows them, along with a sense of humor, that allows them to approach from their own perspective their limitations. It allows them to see you modeling that vulnerability of the laugh. And it allows them, who are the only ones who are going to fix these problems eventually, to actually address these problems in a way that is more confident and frankly more joyful.
Thank you very much. We are almost out of time. I really want to give David a few minutes to just sort of give us the key points of what we covered and his thoughts moving forward, and then we will close.
That's a large task. No, I mean, I think both discussants have summarized the major points already, Michelle. I'm not quite sure what I can add beyond what Michael and Rebecca just summed up. I'm wondering, are there questions from the audience that might be addressed?
We just have one that I think is a great thing to close on, which is, what would a healthy relationship with social media look like, in your opinion?
Authenticity. This is who I am, warts and all, because that admission allows other people to admit their limitations and their need for each other. Remember, look back at all the relationships that are really solid and meaningful in your life. Most people say, with my mom. Why is that? Because my mom loves me anyway, even if I'm a jerk. You know, even if I can't run as fast as the other kids, even if I eat too little or too much. And I think that kind of, not unconditional love, but that kind of love that surpasses and includes and embraces our limitations is what we're seeking, not only individual to individual, but nation to nation and culture to culture. And because we're afraid of being seen as weak, we routinely avoid that. And I think that in many ways, we are using the social media environment to avoid it further by posturing in it.
Michael, to be authentic like that and not create a screen image just to sell yourself as some form of perfection means that you have to make yourself vulnerable. And it's very difficult to make yourself vulnerable if you don't know who's in the room. So how do you do that?
I would argue that it is hard, but the best things in life are usually hard, right? And the things that we really achieve things with. I mean, remember what JFK said about getting to the moon. We're not doing these things because they're easy. We're doing them because they are hard. And I would argue that that's where humanity is going to succeed, is when we acknowledge that we are human. And when we say, yes, we need each other. Let's not pick up guns because you scare me, but let's open our arms and our hearts and our minds to each other, because there's something in you that I value. I want to find something in you that I value. And when I do that, you are more likely to open yourself to me. And that's where I get back to humor. I think smiling and laughing go a long, long way toward connecting people with each other.
I think, I'm sorry.
What I was going to say is, you know, I often find myself, in a sense, counseling someone who's a little bit like an adolescent, whose frontal lobes haven't developed and who's ready to fall madly in love with the first object that's shiny and bright, you know. And so what I'll say is, we want to put a break here. I want you to carefully evaluate this situation, this person. I want you to get to know them, get to know what motivates them, what their extended relationships are like, what their activities are like, before you decide wholeheartedly to fall in love and commit to them. And so I think that's a real challenge when you're doing something through a screen, to try to figure that out. I mean, in a sense, saying to my individual patient, take an evidence-based approach to this individual you're forming a relationship with. Don't just jump in feet first into this relationship. It's the way of trying to counsel someone not to become part of a cult. It's the same kind of problem. And maybe you need to know yourself and learn more about yourself before it's safe to form certain kinds of relationships, because you don't realize why you're vulnerable in the ways that you are. I mean, that's maybe where some safe group therapy situation could be helpful. So
It is also where media literacy comes in, because media literacy, especially the Center for Media Literacy's tools are evidence-based, and they are a tool to sort of stop that initial emotional response just carrying you away, and bring in some critical thinking. So that is exactly where media literacy fits into everything that you have been saying today. With that, we are at time. This conversation could go on forever. We have three wonderful panelists who contributed so much. I want to let you know that if you are not signed up yet, on Monday, this series continues next week on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. And on Monday, we will be talking about pandemics, health, hope, and hoaxes. So please sign up if you haven't already. I want to thank our panelists again and wish everyone a wonderful, depending where you are, morning, afternoon, or evening. Also, this has been recorded, and if you did sign up, you will be getting a link to the video. And the two other videos are also available from if you missed Monday or Wednesday's presentation. So with that, thank you all very much for coming.